An old man stands before a court of hundreds. No weapons, no army, no calls to violence, only questions. The accusation is simple, yet unsettling. He is guilty of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods of the city. But beneath those charges lies a deeper crime, one that no legal system ever writes down. This man thinks differently. And worse, he teaches others how to think. This is Socrates, standing trial in Athens in 399 BC. Athens likes to remember itself as the birthplace of freedom, democracy, reason, open debate, a civilization proud of its philosophers, poets, and public dialogue. Yet here stands one of its most famous thinkers, sentenced not for what he did, but for what he made people feel. Uncomfortable, exposed, uncertain. Socrates was not a revolutionary in the traditional sense. He did not write books. He did not give speeches filled with answers. He wandered marketplaces, gymnasiums, and public squares, engaging ordinary citizens in conversation. His method was deceptively simple. He would ask questions, then more questions, then questions about the answers to those questions. Slowly, something unsettling would happen. The confident man would stumble. The respected leader would contradict himself. The expert would realize he didn't actually know what he claimed to know. Socrates called this process inquiry. Others experienced it as humiliation. Athens was a society built on reputation, honor, and public image. To be exposed as ignorant, especially in front of others, was not a harmless intellectual exercise. It was a social wound. And Socrates inflicted those wounds casually, without malice, smiling as he did it. He compared himself to a gadfly, stinging the lazy horse of the state to keep it awake. But from the perspective of the horse, the gadfly is not a philosopher. It is a nuisance, a threat, something to be crushed. The danger was never that Socrates gave people false beliefs. The danger was that he took their certainty away. Because certainty is comfort. Certainty is identity. Certainty tells you who you are, where you stand, and why your life makes sense. And Socrates made people realize that much of what they believed rested on fragile assumptions, inherited opinions, and social approval rather than truth. Athens tolerated many things. What it could not tolerate was widespread doubt. A democracy depends on shared narratives, on agreed-upon values, on citizens who believe they understand justice, virtue, and the good life, at least well enough to vote, judge, and rule. Socrates did not offer better narratives. He questioned the foundations of all of them. To the young, this was intoxicating. To their elders, it was terrifying. Young Athenians followed him, listening as powerful men were verbally dismantled, using nothing but logic and patience. Authority lost its mystique. Status lost its armor. The youth began to see that confidence was not the same as wisdom. And when that realization spreads, hierarchy trembles. The official charges accused Socrates of corrupting the youth. But corruption implies replacing good values with bad ones. Socrates replaced certainty with uncertainty, obedience with curiosity, comfort with responsibility. That is not corruption. That is destabilization. Athens had recently emerged from war, plague, and political upheaval. The city was fragile, its democracy insecure. In such times, societies do not crave questions. They crave stability. Socrates offered none. What made him truly dangerous was not his intelligence, but his insight into human psychology. He understood something most people spend their lives avoiding. Humans do not primarily defend truth. They defend their sense of self. Challenge a belief, and you challenge identity. Expose ignorance, and you expose vulnerability. Question meaning, and you threaten order. Socrates did all three, relentlessly. By the time he stood before the court, the verdict was already written, not in law, but in emotion. Resentment had accumulated quietly over decades. Each embarrassed official, each offended citizen, each uncomfortable conversation added another grain of sand to the scale. This trial was not about religion. It was not about youth. It was about control. And Athens was losing it. To understand why Socrates had to die, one must understand what ignorance provides. Ignorance is not merely the absence of knowledge. It is a psychological shelter. It protects people from uncertainty, anxiety, and existential fear. It allows life to feel stable, predictable, and morally clear. In a world filled with chaos, ignorance offers relief. Socrates stripped that relief away. He did not tell people what to believe. He made them realize they didn't know why they believed anything at all. This realization is not liberating at first. It is destabilizing. It feels like standing on solid ground that suddenly cracks beneath your feet. Most people, when confronted with that feeling, do not seek truth. They seek escape. They retreat into dogma. They cling to tradition. They defend authority, not because it is right, but because it is familiar. Athens was no different. The city praised freedom of speech, but only within invisible boundaries. You could debate policies. You could criticize leaders. But you could not question the underlying assumptions that held the society together. You could not ask whether those in power actually knew what they were doing. You could not suggest that wisdom was rarer than confidence. Socrates crossed those lines every day. His questions exposed a contradiction at the heart of Athenian democracy, a system that claimed to value reason, yet depended on unexamined beliefs to function, a society that celebrated freedom, yet feared those who took that freedom seriously. When the court sentenced Socrates to death, it framed the act as justice, as protection, as necessary for the moral health of the city. But beneath the language of law was something far more primal. Fear. Fear that doubt would spread. Fear that young minds would stop obeying. Fear that authority would lose its sacredness. Fear that once people realized how little they knew, they would begin to question everything. Socrates was offered the chance to save himself. He could renounce his methods. He could promise silence. He could flee into exile. But to do so would betray the very principle he lived by, that a life without examination is not worth living. So he chose death, not as martyrdom, not as defiance, but as consistency. In doing so, he delivered his final lesson, that freedom is not comfort, that truth is not safe, and that societies will always punish those who reveal uncomfortable realities while pretending to defend virtue. The execution of Socrates was not a failure of Athenian democracy. It was its inevitable outcome. When a society values stability over truth, order over understanding, and identity over inquiry, the questioner becomes the enemy. The irony is unavoidable. Athens believed it was silencing a problem. Instead, it immortalized one. Socrates did not die because he was wrong. He died because he was effective, because his questions worked, because they lingered in the minds of those who heard them, long after his voice was gone. And that is the true danger of the questioner. Not that he destroys society, but that he reveals what society is built upon. As the poison took effect, Socrates did not curse the city that condemned him. He did not warn of collapse. He simply accepted the price of knowing. And in that quiet moment, a question was left hanging, one that has echoed for centuries. If a society that claims to love freedom cannot tolerate those who question it, was Socrates executed for corrupting the youth, or for revealing the limits of freedom itself? I know that I know nothing is often misunderstood as humility, as if Socrates were simply admitting intellectual modesty. But this phrase was never meant to be comforting. It was meant to unsettle. It was a psychological weapon aimed directly at the human ego. Socrates was not celebrating ignorance. He was exposing it. What he recognized, long before modern psychology, was that ignorance is rarely accidental. People do not simply lack knowledge. They avoid it. They reject it. They defend themselves against it. Ignorance, in this sense, is not emptiness. It is armor. To say, I know that I know nothing, is to step outside the illusion of certainty that most people build their lives upon. It is to accept that the stories we tell ourselves about who we are, what we believe, and why we are right may be far more fragile than we want to admit. This is deeply uncomfortable. The human mind is not designed to seek truth at all costs. It is designed to preserve stability, to reduce anxiety, to protect identity. When new information threatens these goals, the mind resists, not consciously, but instinctively. Socrates understood this resistance. He encountered it every time he asked someone to define justice, virtue, or wisdom. The first answer was always confident. The second was defensive. The third was confused. And then came anger. Because at that moment, something painful happened. The person realized that their certainty had been an illusion. Modern psychology calls this cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort that arises when deeply held beliefs are challenged. When confronted with dissonance, people rarely change their beliefs. Instead, they rationalize, dismiss, or attack the source of discomfort. Socrates became that source. He forced people to confront a gap between who they thought they were and what they could actually justify. And that gap felt like a threat, not to knowledge, but to self-worth. Ignorance, then, begins to feel like freedom. Certainty tells you who you are. It places you within a group. It gives you moral clarity and emotional security. When you know, you belong. When you doubt, you drift. Socrates offered no replacement certainty. He removed the old ones and left nothing in their place except responsibility. Responsibility to think. Responsibility to question. Responsibility to live without guarantees. This is why his philosophy was disturbing. It did not empower people in the way self-help promises empowerment. It weakened the ego before it could strengthen the mind. To accept ignorance is to accept vulnerability. It means admitting that your beliefs may not be special, that your confidence may be borrowed, that your worldview may be inherited rather than earned. Most people are not prepared for that admission. Instead, they cling to social conformity. They align their beliefs with the majority. They absorb opinions from authority figures, traditions, and cultural narratives. These beliefs feel personal, but they are often second-hand. Socrates shattered this comfort by asking a simple question: why? Why do you believe this? How do you know it is true? What happens if it isn't? These questions strip beliefs of their emotional protection. And once exposed, many beliefs collapsed. The disturbing realization was not ignorance itself, but how much effort had gone into avoiding the awareness of it. Athens was filled with people who believed they were wise because others agreed with them. Socrates showed that agreement is not knowledge. Consensus is not truth. Popularity is not wisdom. And once that realization takes hold, it spreads. That is why chosen ignorance is so fiercely protected. Not because people hate truth, but because truth demands change. And change demands sacrifice. To admit ignorance is to admit you might have been wrong, that your past decisions were based on false assumptions, that your identity might need revision, that the world is less stable than you believed. Ignorance, by contrast, allows you to continue uninterrupted. Socrates did not allow that luxury. The most unsettling aspect of Socrates' philosophy was not that he questioned beliefs, but that he refused to replace them with new ones. He did not offer doctrines. He offered discomfort. This is why ignorance feels like freedom. Freedom, as most people understand it, means the absence of inner conflict. It means feeling justified, certain, and morally aligned. Ignorance provides this effortlessly. It allows people to live without constant self-examination, without confronting contradictions, without asking whether their lives truly make sense. Socrates took that freedom away. In its place, he offered something far heavier: awareness. To be aware is to notice inconsistency, to feel doubt, to recognize how little control you actually have over your beliefs. Awareness is not calming, it is destabilizing. It creates anxiety. It isolates. It separates you from the comfort of unquestioned belonging. This is why societies rarely reward deep thinkers. They tolerate them only when their thinking does not disrupt the collective narrative. History repeats this pattern relentlessly. Those who question religious certainty are branded heretics. Those who question political narratives are labeled dangerous. Those who question social norms are called disruptive. The labels change, but the psychology remains the same. When a person exposes ignorance, they threaten more than ideas. They threaten social cohesion. Belief systems are the glue that hold groups together. Undermine them, and you undermine unity. Undermine unity, and you create instability. Socrates lived in a time before mass media, before propaganda machines, before algorithmic persuasion. Yet even then, the instinct to silence the questioner emerged naturally, because the human mind has not changed. Today, ignorance is no longer merely chosen, it is curated. Information is abundant, but understanding is rare. People are surrounded by data, yet insulated from perspectives that challenge their identity. Algorithms feed certainty, not doubt. Outrage, not reflection. The same psychological avoidance that condemned Socrates now operates on a massive scale. People do not seek truth. They seek validation. They follow voices that confirm their worldview. They reject complexity. They mistake confidence for knowledge. And when confronted with contradiction, they react emotionally rather than rationally. Socrates would not survive this environment, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he refused to perform certainty. He would not offer slogans. He would not simplify reality. He would not reassure people that they were already right. And that makes him dangerous even now. Perhaps Socrates was not executed for knowing too much, but for revealing how much people depended on not knowing, for showing that ignorance was not an unfortunate condition, but a preferred state, a state that protects identity, a state that preserves comfort, a state that allows power to operate without scrutiny. His declaration, "I know that I know nothing," was not an endpoint. It was an invitation most people decline, because accepting it means living without illusions. It means recognizing that certainty is often borrowed, that beliefs are often inherited, that confidence is often unearned, and that freedom, in its deepest sense, is not ease, but responsibility. Responsibility to think when it is uncomfortable. Responsibility to doubt when certainty is rewarded. Responsibility to stand alone when belonging requires silence. Socrates understood that this responsibility would never be popular. But he also understood something far more unsettling, that a society built on chosen ignorance does not need tyrants. It polices itself. People silence one another. They mock doubt. They punish questioning, not through execution, but through exclusion. And so the pattern continues. The question Socrates left behind was never meant to be answered easily. It was meant to linger. If ignorance feels like freedom, and awareness feels like burden, what kind of freedom have we been choosing all along? And what are we willing to sacrifice to keep it? Athens killed its questioner in public. Modern society learned something more efficient. It learned that you don't need to silence the questioner if you can make him invisible. You don't need a trial if you can drown a voice in noise. You don't need execution if distraction works just as well. Socrates was confronted by a court. Today, questioning is confronted by an algorithm. The shift is subtle, but profound. In ancient Athens, ignorance was defended through force. In the modern world, ignorance is defended through comfort, through convenience, through endless streams of information that feel like knowledge, but function more like sedation. We live in an age that prides itself on access. Infinite content, infinite opinions, infinite facts. And yet, understanding feels rarer than ever. This is not an accident. Modern systems of power no longer rely on ignorance as a side effect. They rely on it as a feature. Where Socrates slowed people down, modern systems accelerate them. Where he demanded careful thought, modern platforms reward instant reaction. Where he exposed uncertainty, modern culture sells confidence as a product. The result is not a population that knows nothing, but a population that knows just enough to feel certain, and never enough to feel curious. Algorithms are not neutral tools. They are mirrors of human psychology, optimized at scale. They learn what captures attention, what provokes emotion, what reinforces identity. And what they learn is simple. Certainty spreads faster than doubt. Anger spreads faster than nuance. Belonging spreads faster than truth. So that is what they deliver. People are not shown what challenges them. They are shown what confirms them. Beliefs harden. Identities calcify. Complexity becomes suspicious. Questions become annoying. Socrates would have been unbearable in this environment. He would not fit into short formats. He would not offer slogans. He would not provide certainty in under 30 seconds. His method required patience, humility, and discomfort. 3 things modern systems quietly discourage. In Athens, Socrates embarrassed powerful men in public. Today, power embarrasses itself daily, and no one notices because attention has moved on. Scandal follows scandal, outrage replaces outrage, and nothing is examined long enough to matter. This is not censorship. It is saturation. When everything is loud, nothing is heard. Modern ignorance is not enforced by law, but by design. Platforms are engineered to keep users engaged, not reflective, to keep them scrolling, not questioning, to keep them emotionally stimulated, not intellectually unsettled. The ancient court feared Socrates because he disrupted belief. Modern systems fear something else entirely: disengagement, reflection, silence, because reflection breaks momentum, and momentum is profitable. Consider how authority appears today. Rarely as force, rarely as command, more often as entertainment, as personality, as content. Political power becomes spectacle. Expertise becomes branding. Truth becomes a matter of presentation. This is not manipulation in the crude sense. It is psychological alignment. People are guided toward narratives that feel familiar, emotionally satisfying, and socially safe. Over time, these narratives become reality, not because they are true, but because they are repeated. Socrates attacked this mechanism at its root. He did not argue against specific beliefs. He questioned the process by which beliefs were formed. He exposed how people confuse repetition with truth, confidence with knowledge, and authority with wisdom. Modern systems do the opposite. They streamline belief formation. They remove friction. They reduce thinking to reaction. And in doing so, they make ignorance efficient. The most unsettling realization is this: no one needs to force ignorance anymore. People choose it willingly. They choose feeds that affirm them. They choose voices that flatter them. They choose narratives that protect their identity. And when confronted with contradiction, they do not investigate. They disengage. Socrates would not be executed today. He would be ignored, or worse, mocked. He would be labeled impractical, negative, overthinking. He would be told to relax, to stop asking so many questions, to enjoy life. This is how modern society neutralizes the dangerous thinker. Not with poison, but with noise. The true genius of modern ignorance is that it feels like freedom. People believe they are thinking independently because they can choose between countless options. But choice without reflection is not freedom. It is directionless motion. When every belief is immediately validated by some group, some influencer, some algorithm, the need to question disappears. This is how manufactured consent works, not through lies alone, but through selective reinforcement. Certain ideas are amplified. Others quietly fade. Over time, the boundaries of acceptable thought become invisible but firm. No one tells you what not to think. You simply stop encountering it. Socrates forced people to confront ideas they wanted to avoid. Modern systems simply make avoidance effortless. The result is identity-based belief. Beliefs are no longer evaluated on truth, but on alignment. Do they affirm who I am? Do they protect my group? Do they preserve my sense of moral superiority? If yes, they are accepted. If not, they are dismissed, often without examination. This is not stupidity. It is psychology. Human beings evolved to survive in groups. Agreement meant safety. Dissent meant risk. These instincts still operate, even when the threats are no longer physical. Questioning the group feels dangerous. Doubting shared narratives feels like betrayal. Ignorance becomes a social contract, unspoken but enforced. Socrates broke that contract. He showed that belonging often comes at the cost of truth, and that most people accept that trade without hesitation. In modern society, this trade is normalized, even celebrated. Certainty is rewarded. Ambiguity is punished. Confidence is monetized. Doubt is sidelined. Those who ask difficult questions are accused of negativity. Those who complicate narratives are labeled suspicious. Those who refuse simple answers are ignored in favor of those who sound sure. This is how ignorance is perfected, not by suppressing information, but by shaping attention. The tragedy is that many believe this system makes them informed. They can recite talking points. They can defend positions. They can argue passionately. But beneath the surface, something crucial is missing. Understanding. Understanding requires time. It requires discomfort. It requires the willingness to say, I don't know. Socrates built his entire philosophy on that admission. Modern culture treats it as weakness. Perhaps the most disturbing difference between Athens and today is this: Athens knew it was silencing a man. Modern society believes it is empowering individuals, while quietly discouraging the very habits that make empowerment real. Critical thinking does not thrive in environments optimized for engagement. Wisdom does not emerge from speed. Truth does not survive when attention is fragmented. And yet, we are told this is progress. The question is no longer whether Socrates would survive today. The question is whether his method could even function. Would anyone listen long enough? Would anyone tolerate uncertainty without immediate resolution? Would anyone choose reflection over reaction? Or would Socrates simply become another forgotten voice, buried beneath content, commentary, and constant stimulation? The court that condemned him believed it was protecting society. Modern systems believe the same. They protect comfort, stability, engagement, growth. But just like Athens, they fear something fundamental. They fear the moment when people stop reacting and start thinking. Because once that happens, narratives unravel, authority weakens, power becomes visible. Socrates understood this danger long before technology amplified it. He understood that ignorance is not the enemy of society. Awareness is. Awareness disrupts. Awareness destabilizes. Awareness demands responsibility. And responsibility is heavy. That is why ignorance has been refined, optimized, and scaled. That is why distraction is endless. That is why certainty is sold so aggressively. Not because truth is unavailable, but because truth is inconvenient. As this realization settles, a final question emerges, quiet, uncomfortable, unavoidable. In a world overflowing with information, where ignorance is no longer enforced but engineered, if Socrates were alive today, walking among us, asking his simple, unsettling questions, would we recognize him? Or would we scroll past, satisfied that we already know enough? Socrates did not have to die. This is the detail history often forgets. He was given options. He could have softened his stance. He could have promised silence. He could have fled Athens and lived out his remaining years in obscurity. Many before him had done exactly that. Survival was available. Socrates refused it, not out of stubbornness, not out of pride, but because to accept those terms would have meant admitting that truth was negotiable. That comfort was worth more than integrity. That life itself mattered more than understanding it. For Socrates, that was not living at all. His death was not a failure of courage. It was the final expression of his philosophy, a declaration that ignorance, even when dressed as freedom, was still a form of captivity. This is what makes Socrates unsettling, not his ideas, but his consistency. He lived exactly as he thought, and when forced to choose between truth and safety, he chose truth without hesitation. That choice exposes something uncomfortable about the rest of us, because most of us choose differently. We choose silence when speaking costs too much. We choose agreement when dissent isolates us. We choose comfort when questioning destabilizes our place in the world. And we justify these choices easily. We tell ourselves it is pragmatic, that timing matters, that not every battle is worth fighting, that truth can wait. But beneath these rationalizations lies a simpler reality. Truth has a price. Socrates paid it in full. Most people prefer installments, small compromises that accumulate quietly over time. The reason Socrates still terrifies us is not because he demands impossible heroism. It is because he reveals how ordinary our compromises have become. He forces a question we would rather avoid. What would you give up to remain comfortable? Your reputation? Your career? Your sense of belonging? Your certainty? Socrates shows that freedom, in its deepest sense, is not the ability to do whatever you want. It is the ability to live without lying to yourself. And that ability is rare, not because it is inaccessible, but because it is unbearable. To know yourself honestly is to confront contradictions you would rather ignore. To examine your beliefs is to risk discovering that they are borrowed. To question your society is to realize how much of your identity depends on not questioning it. This is why critical thinking feels isolating. It separates you from collective certainty. It removes the comfort of shared illusions. It places responsibility squarely on your shoulders, with no guarantee of reward. Socrates never promised enlightenment as happiness. He promised it as burden. Modern culture sells thinking as empowerment, as clarity, as control. Socrates offered something far darker and far more honest. He offered awareness without reassurance. Awareness that your beliefs may be wrong. Awareness that your leaders may be ignorant. Awareness that your society may be built on fragile assumptions. That awareness does not feel like freedom. It feels like loss. Loss of certainty. Loss of innocence. Loss of belonging. And yet, Socrates insisted that this loss was necessary. That without it, life shrinks into routine, conformity, and quiet dishonesty. That a comfortable life built on unexamined beliefs is not a life worth protecting. That is why he drank the poison. Not to make a point to history, but to remain faithful to himself. Socrates did not believe everyone should think as he did. He believed everyone should think at all. This distinction matters. His philosophy was not about replacing one set of beliefs with another. It was about refusing to outsource responsibility for meaning, about rejecting the idea that truth could be handed down by authority, tradition, or majority opinion. That refusal is dangerous, not because it leads to chaos, but because it undermines the quiet agreements that keep societies comfortable. Agreements to stop asking certain questions. Agreements to accept certain narratives. Agreements to look away when examination becomes inconvenient. Societies do not fear ignorance. They depend on it. Ignorance smooths friction. It allows systems to function without constant challenge. It makes power invisible. It keeps people focused on surface-level conflicts instead of underlying structures. Socrates threatened this equilibrium simply by refusing to stop asking why. And that threat still exists. Anyone who begins to question deeply, to interrogate not just opinions but assumptions, quickly discovers how unwelcome that habit can be. Friends grow uneasy. Institutions grow defensive. Conversations grow tense. Not because questions are wrong, but because they destabilize comfort. This is the cost of knowing. You may lose certainty. You may lose status. You may lose belonging. Socrates lost his life. Most people lose something smaller, but no less meaningful. Approval. Simplicity. The ease of going along. The tragedy is that modern society often praises critical thinking in theory while discouraging it in practice. It celebrates curiosity as long as it does not threaten foundational beliefs. It welcomes questioning until the questions cut too deep. Socrates crossed that line. He refused to stop at safe questions. He pushed until beliefs collapsed or revealed themselves as hollow. And in doing so, he exposed a truth that remains uncomfortable even now. That freedom without responsibility is not freedom at all. That comfort purchased through ignorance is a kind of prison. That self-knowledge is not a gift, but a burden few are willing to carry. The legacy of Socrates is not a doctrine. It is a challenge that asks whether you want to be comfortable or honest, whether you want certainty or understanding, whether you want belonging or integrity. There is no correct answer, only consequences. Socrates accepted his. Most people spend their lives negotiating around theirs. The danger of Socrates is not that he encourages rebellion. It is that he removes excuses. Once you recognize how much of your life is shaped by unexamined beliefs, you can no longer claim innocence. You can still choose ignorance, but you will know that you chose it, and that knowledge changes everything. As his life ended, Socrates did not leave behind instructions, commandments, or solutions. He left behind a question that refuses to fade. Not what should I believe, but why do I believe it? That question does not offer peace. It offers clarity. And clarity, as Socrates understood, comes at a cost. The final, unsettling truth is this. Societies will always tolerate ignorance. They will often celebrate it. But the moment someone begins to question deeply, without seeking comfort, applause, or permission, they become dangerous. Not because they seek power, but because they expose it. Socrates did not terrify Athens because he challenged the gods or the laws. He terrified it because he revealed how fragile its certainty really was. And that is why, centuries later, his shadow still lingers. Not as a lesson to admire, but as a challenge you cannot easily escape. If knowing the truth cost you comfort, if thinking for yourself cost you belonging, if awareness cost you peace, what exactly is freedom worth to you? And how much are you willing to pay for it?